Hey everyone, welcome to the latest installment of The Way It Is. And I'm your host, as always, Luca, Luca First at Next First Realty. And we're in the boardroom again. We're fortunate to be face-to-face today with Brandon Tozzo, who is a newly minted Kingston councillor, Kings Court Rideau councillor in November's election. Brandon, I'm just going to get a bit of a history. You moved to Kingston 15 years ago to do your PhD in political studies at Queen's, or political science, if they still call it that, Queen's University. That's my undergrad, so we might have a couple conversations about that. You had attended Western for your bachelor's and your master's previous to that. You're current president of the local public service union, OPSU 468, and is a member of the Kings Court Association, which I didn't know that existed. So anyway, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And so, Brandon, you're here. Ben and Rob, my administrator, who are my curators for guests for the podcast, because in the face of, and there's a budget today, but in the face of Bill 23, which of course the provincial government's trying to address the housing crisis in the province, let alone nationally. So with the introduction of Bill 23, with Faster Homes, Build More Homes Faster Act, then they went around to the 29 municipalities, I guess, that were selected to have these part of this bill, to make this an additional pledge, if you will.
Correct.
And I'm just going to, if I can find it in my notes, the pledge basically. The City of Kingston is committed to taking actions to help reduce costs and increase the supply of housing using all tools and resources that are available to municipalities. As the city has no tools to require private landowners to build new homes and limited financial resources available to construct new municipally funded affordable housing, this pledge is focused on matters within municipal control, which mainly focus on encouraging new housing construction by reducing municipal barriers and creating incentives. The actual achievement of the municipal housing target cannot be controlled or compelled by the municipality. So in addition to addressing matters within municipal control, the pledge also serves as a call to action for all stakeholders to collaborate, innovate, and help build new homes in the most cost-effective manner possible. Now is the time to come forward and help build more homes. And so your reaction to that, and I'll just give the soundbite, the pledge was redundant as the city was already on track to build more homes that then requested by the provincial government. So let's start there. I've done all the talking. Welcome again. And I guess what made you sort of had to have a bit of an adverse reaction to the pledge, I guess, if you will?
Well, first and foremost, I am not against building more homes. I'm the chair of the Housing and Homelessness Committee, and I recognize that we have an affordability crisis in Kingston. That is, I think, important to note. I think context is important here, and sort of the nature of the relationship between the provincial government and municipalities is key to highlight. Since getting elected, the province put in Bill C-23, the More Homes Built Faster Act, and they had a 25-day window within which to confer with all stakeholders. The AMO, the Association for Municipalities of Ontario, did not get a chance to speak to the province about a major change to development. The very first motion that I helped put forward with Councillor Chinani, he put it forward, I seconded it, was our opposition to Bill C-23. Kingston also has a homelessness crisis and a mental health and addiction crisis. We put forward a motion with the mayor asking the province for additional resources. Our opposition to Bill C-23, as well as other municipalities, wasn't heard. Our request for mental health and addiction supports wasn't heard. Then the province comes to us as a municipality and says, well, did you know we have a housing and homelessness crisis? Yes. Did you know we have an unaffordability crisis? Yes. Would you mind signing a pledge? And the day that was put forward to council was also the day, Pink Shirt Day, the anti-bullying day. And something about that pledge just got under my skin. And I sort of looked at this relationship that we have with the province. And I think if we're going to deal with any crisis, we have to work collaboratively. we have to work with our provincial counterparts and our federal counterparts and say, we have a crisis. What can we do together? Dictates are not collaboration. What would have happened if we all would have said no to this pledge? What would have happened?
Well, Bill C-23 is still in existence.
Exactly. They would have made us do it anyways.
Right.
That is not a collaborative relationship. So that got under my skin. And sometimes when a bill or a motion is put forward, it's not that you don't want to do the request. It's that you sometimes want to take a symbolic stance against what I thought was a bully. It was anti-bullying day, and I made it very clear that I think I need to send a message that this is not unanimously accepted, that some councillors are opposed to the imposition of this voluntaristic pledge. And I voted no. And I was very clear with my statement as to I support housing, I support affordable housing. It would also be nice if the province put some money and some resources or some tools behind the recognition of this crisis for municipalities to help deal with it. So I took a symbolic stance against this, and I voted against this motion. I wanted to stand up to the bully. I thought it was the right thing to do.
Well, I applaud you for taking a stand on those principles, for sure. And certainly, yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone, no matter what political stripe you wear, is naive to think that there isn't a housing crisis and that we need to build more homes regardless. So certainly no one was calling you out on that for sure. So, I mean, I'm going to backtrack a bit. Sure. Political studies major, obviously. Yeah. So that was your undergrad, your master's, and your PhD then? So,
in housing of all things.
Really? Okay, because I was going to ask sort of what the discipline was, I guess, or sort of the specifics of it. And so was the goal to teach, and are you teaching, or did this sort of, you thought, hey, I'm going to run for councillor in Kings Court District?
Yeah, so I work for the provincial government, oddly enough, and I'm a union local president, and I defended a lot of frontline service workers throughout the pandemic. And I also teach part-time at Trent University in political science. So I'm a part-time prof and a full-time sort of union person.
Okay.
So I have my sort of hat in two fields. The sort of incentive for me to get involved in politics was the experience of seeing frontline service people during the pandemic and seeing how they were treated, and kind of not learning the lessons that we should have about how we treat people. I saw members of mine sacrifice deeply. There were some nurses in my local, and I saw how they were treated by this government and by many other governments. And it seemed like when we needed them, we called them heroes. And then when they were no longer needed, they needed to go away. Yeah. And that really just frustrated me and angered me. I also felt like governments haven't been listening to people for a long period of time. And not that I think governments are unresponsive necessarily in a time of crisis, but I think if we've learned anything from the past few years, it's we need to value people again. We need to value the people who kept this province going, who kept this country going, who are the 9 to 5 and then the 5 to 9 workers. We need to keep those people sort of front and center of our politics. And that's really was the reason why I decided to put my name forward. It was just a frustration with, it seemed like a disconnect between our political leaders and the actual people who got us through this crisis. Yeah. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I've aired my opinions on the politics and those that operate in that world, especially. I mean, it's been gross for a number of years, but it got exacerbated during the pandemic. And what I find galling, I guess, most of all, and you see, and Doug Ford was the epitome of it. He truly was Justin Trudeau close second, because I'm a liberal normally, don't carry the card, but I certainly would normally tend to vote that way. But just this blatant patronizing lip service to the sound bites and to it's reactionary, it's not thought out, it's just placation, it's treating the citizens and the citizenry basically as sheep that just huddle along and follow along without any thought to anything, and trust in us and all will be fine or whatever. So I certainly appreciate your sentiment there. Now, I've had Mayor Patterson on several times. I certainly like the cut of his jib, I guess, if that's a way to put it. I think he's well-grounded enough, I mean, I certainly not a volatile character, and he's certainly not one that, he's not a lightning rod in the ground that's going to sort of create, animosity one side or the other. He's pretty even keel, which is never a bad thing, I suppose, in politics. But so he just recently had his regional mayoral meeting there, the inaugural one. They talked about, obviously, all of these issues, housing and everything like that. Any comments on that, or how you feel about that, or if in your opinion, do you feel it was successful? Do you feel that you can comment on that?
Yeah, I'll comment more broadly on the leadership of Mayor Patterson. I'm new to council, so I'm still like green, and I'm learning the ropes, and I am. Mayor Patterson, I really appreciate his leadership. I think that he is a great head of council. He's fair in his rulings. And the nice thing about council is the politics that we have are not that different. We are all living in Kingston. We all have the same problems. We often have different solutions to get there, but it's often not extreme. It's a matter of degrees. So even on areas where I would call it it's a very collegial disagreement on areas where we don't agree. And that's been my experience so far on council. This isn't to say Mayor Patterson and I don't agree on most things. We do. But we're able to sort of create such a collegial environment where I kind of really see the other sides of things. It's not with the same partisanship that exists at other levels of government where it's tribal. The federal government, provincial government is, you're doing something, we hate it because we're of a different tribe than you. City council much works in a way where there's nothing forcing you to vote a certain way other than your conscience and your constituents. And where if someone disagrees with you, it's often because their conscience is a certain way or their constituents are a certain way. And you can understand that. Like you can say, well, I get why you don't want to hire 8 firefighters. You want to hire 12 firefighters. It's not that you don't want to recognize there's a problem. It's just how fastly do you want to deal with it, and where are the tax implications for it. And I find a lot of the debates in council are, because we're not tied to that, we have much more constructive arguments because it's not partisan. It's on ideas. It's on information and evidence. And there are many ways, lenses to view that. And I really appreciate Mayor Patterson's leadership and his experience. He is able to guide council, I think, in a very reasonable way, even when you don't agree with him. And, it never gets heated. And it's always I always say when I disagree with somebody, I'm on the opposite side of my friend and colleague, Councillor Boehm or Councillor Amos. You're still my friend and you're still my colleague. I just don't agree with you. And that's a nice part of I'd say, the culture that the mayor has created on council.
That's great. That's good. So if you were in charge, I'll put the hat on you now. But obviously, given Bill 23, we've just talked about, and you've just described sort of the pros and cons, I suppose, of it. Where do you think Kingston, I guess, sits right now? Do you think we're achieving? Do you think we can do better in terms of what Kingston's trying to do vis-a-vis housing? What's your opinion on that?
I think, Kingston, we already have about 8,000 to 10,000 units in queue to get built.
Yeah.
So we're going to blow that. And this is, again, one of my frustrations is we are already there. Like what the province is demanding, and this is, talk about acuity, they want us to build 8,000 homes. We've got 10,000 in queue. Like, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
It's basically like the province going to you and saying, hey, I want you to breathe. Please breathe. Pledge to breathe. Well, you're going to do it anyways, right? There's also forces beyond our control that we can't force developers to develop. We can't force you to build if you don't want to build. If the interest rates are too high or there's a labor shortage, we can't control for that.
Right.
There are certain things, if I could change the legal framework, I would put money into affordable housing and incentivize it.
Yeah.
The more financial resources we have to build affordable housing, the better it is for everybody. The second thing I would do is, there's a real problem in Kingston that a lot of our private land is privately held, and it's just held for speculation. Let's tax it.
Yeah.
vacantly privately held lands, if you're just sitting on it hoping that the price increases, it's not being utilized.
Right.
You tax it so it incentivizes a developer to build or a landowner to build or sell it.
Right.
Because we are really in a shortage of good land in Kingston to build development. That alone, I think, would free up a lot of land for development and to build housing. So, put your money where your mouth is. The true testament of a government, to your point earlier, is not lip service. It's where you put your money.
Right, exactly. And you're absolutely right, because it certainly doesn't speak to, and the term affordable housing is interpreted a few different ways,
Yes,
right? So,
yes.
Because what's affordable for you may not be affordable for me, and certainly for the majority, housing is just out of sight in terms of not only acquiring it to live in, I mean, but it's just finding reasonable accommodation to move into, right? And you're absolutely right, because I don't think there is enough, and it's not just the PCs in Ontario and the Liberals federally. I mean, this dates back to governments over the last 20, 30 years, 40, 50 years that have been asleep at the switch and not had enough forethought. And not that you need them to be crystal ball readers, but at the end of the day, that's why you're in the positions you're in, and you have experts around you, and you surround yourself with all these experts. As someone at some point in time had to think that we should maybe start thinking about a population increase, an immigration increase, and everything like that. Because that's the other part of this. No one's even, well, now it's been around for a couple of years, and I've even talked to it with clients about it. But now it's finally starting to get some news attention, is this immigration problem that's happening now too, right? Where what are we going to do with all the people that want to come to our shores or come to our country for a better life, that are qualified, that can, right? Feel free to comment, or have you have any thoughts?
Yeah. So immigrants are a great contribution to our country. I'm the son of an Italian immigrant, and I think that we need to create a welcoming environment for immigrants. However, we can't have 500,000 immigrants a year without having housing for them. And again, I think the real failure here is the inability of governments to work together. You are right. This is a problem 40 years in the making. CMHC, the Federal Housing Corporation, used to touch every single home in Canada. They used to ensure, in the 1980s, before they got out of that, we had one of the best housing stocks and most affordable housing stocks in the developed world. They downloaded it to the provinces. They got out of the business, and the provinces then download social housing to the municipalities, which have the least amount of resources. That's effectively saying we're not interested. So this is a problem 40 years in the making.
Right.
And, to your point, we have an economic need for immigration. I really wish, as we have more immigrants, the federal and provincial government would recognize one way we can really help with our economic growth, with our development, with our labor shortage, is by reinvesting in housing. Like, it's all well and good for the province to say, well, municipalities, we want you to do what you can do to fix the housing issue. Well, you're kind of putting it at the lowest level of government with the least amount of resources. This is a national housing crisis. It needs a national solution.
Right. No, I don't disagree with you. And it's, it's interesting, because no matter who you are, if you don't have a base foundation and some stability vis-a-vis an address, it's hard for you to step off and start. Where do you go to apply? Where do you go to apply for anything, for assistance, for a job, for a thing? Like, where are you residing? You can't put Bell Park Fairways, and I don't mean to say that as facetiously as it sounded, but you know what I'm saying? Everyone needs an address, or needs to be secure in where they live, so that then they can feel the confidence and the ability to go out and do what they have to try to do to make their way through this world.
It touches everyone along the income ladder. And we can talk about housing and homelessness and a housing first strategy of getting people into housing. But we're dealing with people with good paying jobs who can't afford their first time house. We're getting people who are living with their parents going into their 30s who can't afford an apartment. Like, if a one bedroom apartment on average is going for $1,600 or $1,700 a month, how do you build up any sort of savings to buy your first time house if it's all going to rent?
Right.
It is not just an injustice for those at the lower end of the income spectrum. It's an intergenerational injustice that we are committing by getting people out of the housing market, now the rental market. It is profoundly incorrect. And to place that blame on municipalities, look, if this was only a problem in Kingston, we'd wear it.
Yeah.
If Kingston had an outlandish housing market that was unaffordable, and Toronto was fine, Ottawa was fine, Belleville was fine, Gananoque was fine, it's a national crisis.
Yeah.
Don't blame Brandon Tozzo from Kings Court Rideau. Like, I might not be the person who's wrong here.
Right.
It's everywhere. And if it is everywhere, the solution has to come from our national leaders. That's why we have them.
Yeah.
It's a national crisis, and it's a profound injustice to everyone.
And Kingston's done its part. I mean, I know we deal with a lot of clients, both investors and homeowners alike, and the change in the zoning bylaws now that exist that allow you to have a secondary suite and then a garden home, so 3 units on a property. We have clients that are availing themselves of the ability to try to do that if financially they can make those units, right? Because those units have to be brought into existence. So that costs capital and money and everything else. I guess, and there's so many not even dominoes because they're not even in a row, but there's just so many variables that are sort of spinning around that are interconnected because, you speak to, with rents being what they are and people now, not being able to set aside any money aside for, especially now with, so now you've got the food prices, which are still way out of control and going up regardless of what the inflation numbers are doing. And you've got the Bank of Canada that, again, that's another bone of contention that I've railed on in this podcast, is because there's another group of people that were asleep at the switch.
Yes,
truly,
yes.
Because there's no reason that during the pandemic, and this isn't hindsight. Don't trust me. This isn't hindsight, but you play by the rules that are given you, right? So, but of course, why wouldn't someone take a 1.85% or 1.35% when it was offered to you? But the point being, had rates stayed at where they were and just stayed steady throughout the pandemic, I dare say that there'd be a lot of all of the unintended consequences that are happening now, i.e., lowest vacancy rates, highest rental rates, those wouldn't have occurred.
Yeah.
At least maybe not to the extent or to the degree that they're occurring now. That's my sort of armchair look at it anyway, because you created, the Bank of Canada or the banks are the ones that created the situation or that universe that allowed for everybody to get into the position that they're in now, right? And the increase in rates hasn't helped anybody. It's just, I've said this time after time ad nauseum. All it's done is separate the haves and the have-nots even wider. So this part here just keeps getting more and more eroded.
They made the housing market a casino.
Excellent point. Good.
And whenever it's a casino, those with the most amount, win, and those with the least amount lose. Like, I take a look at this in a very simple way, and when we, I bought my house in 2015 for $250,000. It's a great house, and I love it. I'm raising my family there in Kings Court, which is a great neighborhood. Kings Court Rideau, I think it's one of the best neighborhoods in Kingston. I love it. It's close to the Memorial Center. It's close to schools. If I wanted to buy that same house today, I'm a prof. I am a city councillor. My wife's a teacher. I don't know if we could afford it.
Right.
Like, we're talking 8 years difference.
Yeah.
Like, that is not fair. And that is not right. And that is because I agree with you. I think the Bank of Canada lowered interest rates, and it just creates such perverse incentives where people dump so much money in the housing market. And I want you to think, what kind of pain are we going to have to experience all across the board to correct this error? I think it's going to get pretty ugly. I've
been thinking about that, and I have clients all the time that say, have we hit the bottom yet? Houses are bottoming out, and I have to tell everybody, like, no, actually, check the context. Okay, houses have dropped, and that's again why I hate the sound bites, because, well, houses have dropped by 40%. Okay, well, actually during the pandemic, they went up 40%. So we're back to even now. We're back to pre-pandemic levels, which was still a very healthy housing market and very healthy, appreciable values for housing. And so Kingston hasn't bottomed out, and there's not going to be a bursting bubble. I mean, we're seeing now daily an uptick in the sales that are happening, in houses selling again for over the asking price, with multiple offers. So the good thing is that's happened, I guess, the byproduct of the Bank of Canada freezing, or at least coming out and saying there's not going to be any more increases. It's given those buyers, those that are qualified and can get a mortgage commitment, to now go into the marketplace with confidence, and that's what they're doing now. So there's still way more demand than there is supply, both on the residential resale side and on the new home construction side has seen a bit of a slowdown, I guess, if you will. And that just, I think, speaks to affordability again, because every rate increase took those that were qualified at a certain level now aren't qualified anymore for that level. So they have to look elsewhere for other options and not the new home construction part of it. So, and not that we're the pundits that are going to solve everything. If only political science people all got together, they could solve all the world's problems,
or make things worse.
Where I mean, and you're right. So Kingston does. Any hopes for the budget? Are you going to listen to the budget? Do you have any
today?
Yeah. Any thoughts on that
budget? I mean, for housing, I think my main priority, what I'm going to be looking for, is anything related to mental health and addiction issues, because housing is so. You're right. There's so many parts of this. There's interest rates, there's the federal government, there's the amount of investment they have, there's CMHC, there's requirements to loans, there's investment, there's labor markets for building. There's a lot of components there where the province is one thing. I will look for, are there going to be additional resources for those most in need in our society? This is where my sort of center lefty sort of part comes out.
Yep.
There's housing issues, and that's complicated. There are people who are suffering from addiction. There are people with mental health issues. Drive past, the integrated care hub and take a look at the unhoused community in Kingston who desperately need resources. These are people living on the margins. I think the testament of a society is how you treat the least well off. We need the province to be able to put some resources there. There are people who are in such desperate need from this pandemic, who have really borne the brunt of it. I am really looking forward to additional resources and investments from the province in that area.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And actually, Mayor Patterson, he was on Ontario Morning this morning talking about his mayoral conference and the budget, and because Kingston declared a state of emergency for mental health in January, right? And so, and we're not alone, like you said. I mean, it's everywhere. You see it everywhere. You just have to go to any urban center and walk through their downtown core or walk around, and you can't escape those that are, homeless or at least on the margins, like you say, and through no fault of their own, a lot of it, right? Because it stems from whatever circumstances, mental illness, you name it, right? I mean, so yeah, no, let's hope that they do put their money where their mouth is this time around. I'll leave you with the last thought. I mean, I appreciate your time and sharing your opinions. What's leave us on a positive, optimistic note. You live in your ward and you're a fan of it. What's something exciting coming up in your ward that you can talk about?
Well, I think that there's a lot of really great things coming up in Kings Court Rideau. We have two wonderful new schools, Molly Brandt and Kingston Secondary School, that have been reopened. One thing I always look forward to, which is just outside of my district, and I don't like highlighting the things outside the district, is the Memorial Center, and so the market will be open again. That's a bit south of the district. And another thing I really love is the Rideau Heights Community Center.
Yes.
In June, we will be hosting a National Health and Fitness Day, and that will take part with many partner groups in the community, and that will be hosted there June 2nd. So that is something I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah.
I have a great district, a dynamic district. I deeply love it. spent most of the past 5 months between, June and October canvassing, and I got to meet thousands of my constituents. And every day I work very, very hard to make them proud, and they put a lot of trust in me. And I keep that in mind every time I'm on city council. I'm working for them every day.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you do. And thank you so much for taking the time for being here,
Thank
Brandon.
you for having me. This was a pleasure.
Okay.